As one door opens, another one closes. I'll tell you what the Browns' latest quarterback change means for the future of Jameis Winston here in Cleveland. It's coming your way next, plus more on the Locked On Browns podcast.
You are Locked On Browns, your daily Cleveland Browns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Dog Pound? I'm Spencer German, your new host of the Locked On Browns podcast, and proudly covering the Cleveland Browns for each and every single day here in the land. Learned this week that Dorian Thompson-Robinson will be the team starter in Cincinnati on Sunday. I'll tell you what it means for Jameis Winston's time with the organization. Speaking of quarterbacks, I have maybe an off-the-wall idea for the Browns to consider at the quarterback position this offseason. Also, on the heels of another season-ending injury to Nick Chubb, the Browns cannot afford to sit Myles Garrett in the hopes of avoiding a similar fate over these final 3 games. As always, I want to thank you for making Locked On Browns your first listen every day, and you for being an everydayer. Of course, we're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use the code all lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play just $5. So big news heading into Wednesday as the team starts to prepare for their Week 16 matchup with the Cincinnati Bengals. 2 division games to go, this being one of them, as the Browns are making a change at quarterback. We found out that Dorian Thompson-Robinson will be starting under center. He spoke at a charity event, making it known that that was the conversations that he had with the organization. And Kevin Stefanski is expected to elaborate on that at some point Wednesday during his usual media availability, why he's making the change. I'm sure he'll have some sort of explanation on why. I'm sure it'll sound something along the lines of, we think he gives us the best chance to win. That tends to be the sort of company line for Kevin Stefanski. But in the grand scheme of things, like, I don't think it matters much who starts at quarterback at this point. I've already sort of said that. I think I was going into the home stretch of the season, I would say maybe wanting to continue evaluating Jameis Winston and the viability of him being a bridge quarterback for this franchise. And now we're not going to get that. That's okay. I think we all kind of understand. We all understand what Jameis Winston was when he signed here. I think in a lot of respects, we all understand what Dorian Thompson-Robinson is in terms of a quarterback as well. But if that's the route that they want to take, if they feel like there's maybe one last thing that they need to see or determine at the quarterback position with DTR, I can understand, I guess, that line of thinking. What I'm more interested in today, though, specifically, because we're not so far removed from Jameis Winston being this locked in, put it in stone option for the Browns as their bridge quarterback next year, as they continue to navigate, obviously, the awkwardness, if you will, of the Deshaun Watson contract and everything that comes with that. People thought that he was the easy solution. He was an easy person to turn to sort of man that role for this team next year in 2025. Similarly to how people felt about Joe Flacco in 2023, after he comes in, leads the Browns to the playoffs, does similar things that as to what Jameis obviously produced and showed you. But I'm gonna be honest, making this move at this juncture of the season, it feels like it's a door closing on Jameis Winston's return to Cleveland. Like that, if you had any questions, or if there was even a possibility of him coming back next year, it just feels like, to me, this is the organization telling you, yeah, like, in a meaningless season at this point with 3 games to go, we don't even feel that it's worth continuing to put Jameis Winston out there and him give us the same sort of the same sort of production that we've seen, which is, yeah, he'll throw for 400 yards. He'll give you some touchdowns, but he'll also turn the ball over so much. Like this feels like a running of course, if you will, with Jameis Winston and the organization recognizing and signaling to everybody that they don't think he is good enough to win this team football games moving forward. Like if they're making this change, they have completed their evaluation of him as an option for them at the quarterback position. Maybe it's hyperbole by me, and I'm reading into a little bit too much, but and you certainly are more than welcome to have a different thought process on it and maybe feel differently about it. But that's the way that I read this. There'd be no reason to not play Jameis the rest of the season if you felt like he was the best option, or you felt like there was still something to see, or you felt like you were trying to showcase what he can do the rest of this year and pave sort of that path towards a return in 2025 and him being your bridge quarterback in 2025. I think that's now gone. Like this is going to be a difficult sort of situation to come back from. I guess in theory, you could sign him back and still go through with that. And maybe that possibility is still there. He talked about how he likes it in Cleveland and the experience that he's had this first year with the fan base and with the franchise and the organization, the leaders in charge and his teammates. I'm sure that Jameis would be open to that possibility. But to me, this reads as an organizational decision where they sort of they don't feel that Jameis is the option for them moving forward. I also think that now leads to what these next 3 games mean for DTR. And in some respects, I get where maybe you're hoping to see some final answers as to what he kind of is as a quarterback in this league. But I'm gonna be honest, guys. Like I think they have that figured out. I think at this point he's been a third string quarterback for you. He's been this a solid backup option to turn to and see what you can get of him. And there's been moments where he's provided a spark for this team, but it's not nearly on the level of what we saw from Joe Flacco last year or Jameis Winston even this year stepping in for Deshaun Watson. So I don't know that they're really using this as like some deep rooted evaluation of Dorian Thompson-Robinson either. Maybe there's a few things they're still sort of looking at, but this ultimately feels more like it could be an audition for DTR to determine if they can maybe trade him in some capacity and accumulate some picks, because we know this team right now, given the state of things, very much in pick accumulation mode. And I also think there's a chance that if he plays or gives you or shows you what he's done to this point in his career, that this ends with the Browns essentially accepting that they're revamping the entire quarterback room around Deshaun Watson, who's probably going to be back next year just by the nature of the contract that he's currently under and signed to. I think that much is a given. But what does this thing look like around him is what is sort of uncertain, or there are questions about whether they do run it back with Dorian Thompson-Robinson or whether Jameis is back in the picture. You could ultimately see both these guys back or not back next year, and they sort of go a different route, whether it be signing guys in free agency, making any trades, drafting somebody. So that's kind of what I think is fascinating about the last 3 games potentially belonging to Dorian Thompson-Robinson here the rest of the way. But yeah, I think this marks the end of Jameis Winston's time in Cleveland. I just don't know how you turn back to him after basically signaling, yeah, we don't think he's good enough to finish a meaningless season and play these final 3 games for us, that we're going to try something else. We have months to continue talking about the quarterback position and what that looks like for the Browns in 2025. But I do have one in mind that I think could help the Browns sort of thread the needle on winning now and trying to rebuild all at the same time. I'll tell you who it is next on the Locked On Browns podcast. each and every single Sunday, I sit down, I get ready for kickoff, I get ready for these games, and I start sort of scrolling through the FanDuel app to figure out what bets I'm placing today. I've talked about it before. I'm a big first touchdown guy. I like to take some flyers on that. The playoffs are just around the corner. I'm going to be doing a ton of first touchdown bets come playoff time, trying to guess which teams are what first drives are going to look like for these teams and who's going to finish them off with touchdowns. I'll do that. I'll try to parlay some things together that time of year as well. And through the final 3 weeks of the regular season, I will do much of the same. And that's what FanDuel offers to you. All the options at your fingertips right there in the FanDuel app to bet from home or wherever you might be taking in these games, out at the bar with your friends or otherwise. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win on that first $5 bet. It's a deal you cannot pass up. The FanDuel Sports app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL, all in one place, like I said, at your fingertips. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you placed all your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet hits. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, your official sportsbook partner of the NFL. It's that time of year, folks. The college football playoff is back. And with a newly expanded 12-team format to boot, it's guaranteed to be bigger than ever, bringing you all the hard-hitting, high-flying excitement that you love. TNT Sports coverage of the college football playoff begins December 21st, starting with the college football playoff kickoff show presented by AT&T at 11 a.m. Eastern, leading into our first matchup, the Southern Methodist University Mustangs battling the Penn State Nittany Lions. That game kicks off at noon. Then the Clemson Tigers look to upset the Texas Longhorns in a showdown at 4 p.m. Don't miss a moment of the action. Watch the college football playoff presented by Allstate. It's live on TNT, True TV, TBS, and Max. So it is going to be a long, winding offseason of questions about the quarterback position for the Cleveland Browns. We know that about this team, and I don't need to go too deep into the weeds with you here on all the different iterations of what that could look like in terms of the quarterback options they have, guys they could bring in to be bridges. What's the one thing I can tell you about the state of the room right now is that Deshaun Watson's likely to be part of it. I don't see a path out of the Deshaun Watson business in 2025 because the contract is just too big of an albatross hanging over the organization for them to part ways with him. I understand everyone's going to reference the Russell Wilson situation in Denver. It's not tenable to follow that same process. Russell Wilson ate up the majority of an $80 million dead cap hit for Denver, but the difference is Deshaun Watson's dead cap hit, given all the money that they kicked down the road, closer to like $170 million. That's just impossible to navigate in a single season. So you're more than likely going to see Deshaun back in 2025. I think fans should you should be preparing yourself right now for that. And it's just kind of about what things look like around him, what the room looks like around him, what type of competition do they bring in to play around Deshaun Watson or to play instead of Deshaun Watson, assuming that he's not going to be just the bona fide name starter to begin the season, which I think is a pretty fair assumption because at this point, how could you possibly go into next year still trying to build your team around this quarterback who I think is clearly going through it mentally? He's not the same guy and who's coming off of yet another season-ending injury. It's just not you can't do it. You cannot put your stock in Deshaun Watson being the player that they thought he was going to be when they traded for him several years ago. So again, this conversation will evolve over time. There's plenty of places we can go with it in regards to options they could draft. this year, which I know this draft class isn't getting a ton of hype right now at the quarterback position, but we will have those conversations. We will have time and plenty of space to talk about that together, you and I. That said, I will throw out one option that came to mind for me this week as I was watching Monday Night Football, and now feels even more like a possibility because of a change at the quarterback position that is taking place. If you're not catching on to where I'm at, I'm obviously talking about the Atlanta Falcons, and I'm obviously talking about Kirk Cousins, who is in his age 36 season. He signed that contract with the Falcons this past offseason as as sort of being this new age of quarterbacking in Atlanta. And it was kind of weird after that because they signed him and then went and drafted Michael Penix Jr. Well, Michael Penix Jr. is now taking over. They're making a switch at the quarterback position, still in the playoff race down there in the NFC South, and trying to sort of get a spark because Kirk has struggled over his last 5 games. And understanding the context of that, understanding that Kirk's numbers recently have dipped and have not been what the Falcons are looking for, what anybody would really want to sort of hang their hat on, I still think that this is something that the Browns should consider in terms of trying to go out and get Kirk Cousins. There's several reasons for this. I think, the biggest one is he has experience playing in Kevin Stefanski's offense from his time in Minnesota. 2018, 2019, the 2 years that Kevin Stefanski was on an interim level, sort of running the show in 2018 and then running the offense as the offensive coordinator in 2019. And that was a year, by the way, in 2019 where the Vikings had a super successful season. Kirk Cousins had 26 touchdowns to 6 interceptions, and he was obviously playing at a very, very high level under Stefanski's guidance. The year before that, he had what at the time was his career high in yards and 4,298 yards and a completion percentage of 70, which is still his highest completion percentage. That was in 2018. And the year after that, he had a 69 completion percentage, 69.1. Even though he had maybe less yards, it was still a fantastic sort of campaign for him. So there is evidence that this can work between those two. It's part of what got Kevin Stefanski the job in Cleveland in the first place, was the idea that he knew how to take a quarterback like Kirk Cousins and make him successful. And so schematically, he's a perfect fit. And I think that is an intriguing and enticing proposition to bring in a quarterback that has history with Kevin Stefanski, that can run his offense, that can have success running his offense, and that gives the Browns a legitimate option to sort of fall back on as they try to get through the Deshaun Watson situation as smoothly as possible. So I'm intrigued by the idea of a reunion between Kevin Stefanski and Kirk Cousins. The biggest dilemma in this entire thing would be the money, because he did sign sort of a pretty lofty contract with Atlanta last year, 4 years, $180 million. Now, in terms of what that means for the Browns, you have to trade for him. Of course, I don't think he's going to get released by the Falcons, but maybe that would be the case. If that's what it came to, that obviously makes it even easier to potentially bring him in, because then you're just going to end up paying whatever he's going to sign for in free agency, which would likely be, in lieu of the Russell Wilson situation, a vet minimum type deal where he's still getting paid by his previous team and he can play for a smaller amount for his new team. If you are to trade for him, his base salary next year is $27.5 million, which is a massive figure. It turns into $35 million after that in 2026 and in 2027. I understand where that sounds a little too daunting. Like that's a tough thing to sort of figure out. But we know that Andrew Berry has been the master at moving money around and kicking the can down the road, if you will, in terms of trying to extend out these contracts over a longer period of time and not have to pay all of the money up front. He could certainly do that. People are going to throw out that it wouldn't work because of the money. Like, you can't possibly have his contract and Deshaun Watson's contract on your books at the same time. On the surface, of course not. But we see how these teams navigate these things in the past. I mean, the Saints for years have been kicking money down the road to be able to give themselves some roster flexibility to make the moves that they need to make. The Browns have been doing something similar here in recent years, especially with the Deshaun Watson contract. So it's possible. Is it what you want in an ideal world? No, because you have to pay this money at some point, and you don't want to just keep seeing it get kicked down the road, because in 2029 or whatever year, that bill is going to come due. But in the meantime, as you're trying to sort of thread the needle here on staying competitive, because you think you have a roster that can still do that with guys like Myles Garrett, guys like Denzel Ward, maybe Joe Bitonio if he comes back for another season. Like, you feel like you're in a place where you can still compete, and you don't want to tear it down to the studs and start a complete rebuild, but you do need to start thinking about getting younger. Well, hey, you have a first-round pick this year finally. You can start drafting with that in mind, but maybe you can get a veteran quarterback like Kirk Cousins, who provides some stability at the quarterback position and is something new and fresh than what you've dealt with and seen the last couple of years. I also understand he's coming off the injury, the Achilles injury. That seems to be something that maybe is factoring into why he's struggling a little bit here. Maybe another year removed from that helps him get better. He's older. Like, he's 36 years old. He'll be 37 next year if he's playing for the Browns under these parameters that I'm sort of laying out for you. I understand that it's not the ideal situation, but where the Browns find themselves right now is not an ideal situation either. So it is about sort of just navigating it the best you can here and trying to do what works for keeping the team competitive now, while also starting to plan for the future. When we get back, more for you on this episode in relation to the final 3 games of the season. I know Nick Chubb just suffered a season-ending injury, and we saw Myles Garrett have a scary situation of his own in that loss to the Chiefs, where he got poked in the eye, and people were wondering if he was severely hurt. As tempting as it might be to think about sitting down somebody like Myles Garrett for the rest of the year to avoid any serious injuries, it's just not something that's viable for the Cleveland Browns. I'll explain why next on the Locked On Podcast. Today's episode is sponsored by PrizePicks. If you love watching the game, you're going to love PrizePicks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy, whether it's football, basketball, or any of your favorite sports. PrizePicks makes your holiday bigger and brighter. You can now win up to 1,000 times your money on PrizePicks. Plus, this holiday season, they're giving away $30+ million in rewards during Picksmas and offering 2 free picks in December. And when your picks hit, PrizePicks makes it easy to cash out. You can get your money in as fast as 15 minutes. This week, I'm looking ahead. Jared Goff, 230 passing yards. Saquon Barkley for more than a touchdown. He didn't score this past weekend against the Steelers. He only had the 60 or so yards. I think he's going to have a bounce back effort because he's too damn good this year not to. It's quick, simple, and so much fun to challenge myself, get into some contests with my friends. You can download PrizePicks app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after your first $5 lineup. That's right, $50 instantly when you play just $5. PrizePicks, run your game. Did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions that you forgot about or that you were paying for twice? That definitely happened to me. I had a few subscriptions that I wasn't aware of. I thought I was on top of things in terms of understanding where my money was going, what I was paying for. Rocket Money made it so easy to track down a few mystery ones that I wasn't aware of. And it's like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps you lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even goals that you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. You can cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Some final thoughts on today's episode as we turn the page on the Chiefs game and start focusing ahead on the final 3 games that remain in a obviously disappointing Browns season. And listen, I get it. Like, seeing Nick Chubb go down with an injury last week was not fun for anyone, yourself included. As somebody who covers this team, myself included, we are all, I think, together Nick Chubb fans in this town. And it was an unfortunate thing. He battled his way back from that knee injury, gotten back out on the field. And while he never quite looked like himself, it did, there were some encouraging signs that he was starting to figure it out and start to look a little bit more like the Nick Chubb of old. And there is some intriguing thoughts that he could get back to being close to that player, or a percentage of that player, with some time this offseason to get off his feet and let the knee heal a little bit more. But now he also has the foot injury sort of thrown into it. Now, where I want to go with this, because I do understand where you see something like that last week, and it's frustrating, it's disappointing, all of the above. I think that sometimes fans have a tendency to apply that to other players on the roster and start to question, should Myles Garrett be playing? Should they shut him down for the season? Guy who has been dealing with, injuries to his feet this year. Guy that we just saw in the same exact game that Nick Chubb was broke his foot and is now out for the season, get poked in the eye and was sort of withering around in pain for a period of time late in the second quarter, that left people, wondering if he had suffered a serious injury. And so it is kind of a scary situation. It's a risky situation to put Myles Garrett out there on the field each and every single week and hope, if you will, that he doesn't get hurt, and just kind of pray that maybe that's the biggest goal this team has for the rest of the season, is not let any of these other key players get injured seriously where it costs them part of next year or all of next year in any specific way. And Myles Garrett obviously is at the forefront of that. So it's a risk. Yes, it's always going to be. But the problem with suggesting that they shut down Myles Garrett is it's not that simple. Like, they're first and foremost, and Kevin Stefanski's talked about this, Myles has talked about this, like, these guys are competitors. They want to be out there playing. They don't want to just sit down and not be out there in the field participating in games because they're, trying to be risk averse, if you will, and not get hurt. They want to compete. They get paid. Some of these guys, like, they're getting paid based off of incentives, and you got to hit certain thresholds to get those things. Myles Garrett, that's not the case. He's locked into what he's making, and rightfully so. He's one of the best players and obviously one of the best pass rushers in the sport, one of the best defensive players in the sport. But even for his sake, like, he wants to be out there competing. And I think what complicates it even further, if that's something that you're thinking is something the Browns should consider, from Myles' standpoint, he has really embraced these last couple of years, like, being a vocal leader on this team, especially on the defensive side of the ball. And you've heard it this year as this season has gone up in smoke and fallen apart from what it was supposed to be, dubbed as this chance to make a run in the playoffs and maybe be a Super Bowl contender, to 3-11 sitting here with 3 games to go. He has been one of the more vocal players and people on this team who comes out every single week talking about what there still is to play for, finding your why, not quitting, not giving up on each other, how he's going to hold people accountable for playing hard until the very end of the season and still trying to accumulate as many wins as possible over however many games were left at any given time. He just called out last week the fact that he thought there was just not there was a lack of accountability within the roster and within the locker room this season. And, like, if he then pulls himself out of a game, or the team comes to him and says, hey, we're shutting you down for the season, I think he loses credibility in sort of being able to do that. Like, he can't be the guy saying, rah, we need to rally around each other, even in a bad season, and then not actually be out there going to battle with his teammates every single week. And I also think it would change the way that Myles Garrett feels about this organization if that's what they're going to do. because he has been adamant that he wants to be here as long as Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Berry are here. He said that just last week. And so the idea that you could pull him aside and say, hey, we're shutting you down, and he doesn't feel some type of way about it is just a misguided thought, I think, from anybody who might feel that way, yourself included or otherwise. So I just don't think that's a true possibility for this team. I get why on the outside looking in, that seems like an easy decision to make. It's just not viable in the NFL and locker room environment and setting that these guys exist in. And Myles Garrett is certainly the biggest example of that. So I expect to see him out there these last 3 games. I expect them to still try to contribute to winning. And from a fan perspective, I think you just got to kind of hope and not make it a forefront of your mind thought, but a back of your mind thought that nothing bad happens to Myles Garrett. Put him in bubble wrap as much as you can without actually removing him from the field. Another one of the books, guys. Thank you for joining me in talking about your favorite football team. We have a lot more to get into this week. We'll hear from Kevin Stefanski about why he's making the change at quarterback, and we'll break it all down with you on the next episode of the Locked On Browns podcast. Do want to thank you, as always, for being an everydayer here on the show, for making Locked On Browns your first listen every day. For your second listen, go ahead and check out one of the new Locked On NFL shows, or you can keep it local. Check out Locked On Cavs, Locked On Guardians. You can find any Locked On content on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast.